The armory smelled of gun oil and old wars. Master Chief Aldrich Kane stood alone in the pre-dawn darkness, his hands moving with the practiced precision of a man who had cleaned weapons in worse places than this. The M4A1 carbine before him was a relic from Desert Storm, 34 years old, the same age as his service. The metal was cold under his scarred fingers, but the memories it carried were warm with blood and fire. He was 61 years old. In 6 months, he would retire. In 6 months, the uniform he had worn since the Persian Gulf would hang in a closet, and the knowledge he carried, the hard-won lessons of 3 decades of warfare, would begin its slow fade into irrelevance unless he passed it on. But before he left, before he walked away from the only life he had ever truly understood, he needed to answer one question that had been burning in his gut for the past 5 years. Could the future fight as hard as the past? The rifle's bolt carrier group slid free with a familiar click. Kane inspected it in the pale fluorescent light, looking for wear patterns, for stress fractures, for the microscopic evidence of entropy that claimed all things eventually. His mind drifted backward, carried on the scent of Hoppa's No. 9 solvent, to a night in 1987 when he was 24 years old and bulletproof, or at least believed he was. The Persian Gulf, the tanker wars, American-flagged vessels moving through the Strait of Hormuz, while Iranian Revolutionary Guard gunboats prowled the shipping lanes like sharks. Kane had been a young SEAL then, standing on the deck of a frigate in full combat gear, watching the dark water and waiting for the small fast boats to emerge from the pre-dawn gloom. When they came hard and loud, their engines screaming across the flat water, their machine guns already firing. He remembered the weight of his weapon, the taste of salt spray, the way time compressed and expanded simultaneously during combat, every second both infinite and instantaneous. He remembered dragging a wounded sailor behind cover, the deck slick with blood and seawater, the Iranian rounds punching holes in the steel bulkhead above their heads with sounds like hammers on an anvil. They had won that engagement. They had won most of them. But Kane had learned something fundamental in those waters. Technology was a crutch, not a solution. The GPS was new then, revolutionary, and half the operators had trusted it blindly. But when the systems failed, when the electronics fried from saltwater corrosion or enemy jamming, it was the men who could navigate by stars and compass and dead reckoning who brought everyone home. He looked down at the roster sheet on his workbench, illuminated by the single desk lamp that carved a pool of yellow light from the surrounding darkness. One name was highlighted: Voss, Ilara, Captain, Naval Special Warfare, SEAL Operator. Kane's jaw tightened. He knew that name, not her name, but the surname, the ghost that came with it. Captain Daniel Voss. Army Rangers. Mogadishu, Somalia, October 3rd, 1993. The day that became known as Black Hawk Down, when the best-laid plans of American military precision collapsed into 18 hours of urban warfare that cost 19 American lives and left 73 wounded. Kane had been there as a SEAL liaison, attached to the Ranger element for the mission. He had watched Daniel Voss die. The memory came unbidden, as it always did. The narrow street choked with dust and smoke, the cacophony of AK-47 fire echoing off concrete walls, Somali militia swarming like hornets from every doorway and alley, and Daniel Voss, 32 years old, a Ranger captain with a wife and a 5-year-old daughter back in Georgia, kneeling in the middle of that hell, with 3 wounded men behind him and a wall of hostiles in front. Voss had taken 4 rounds. Kane could still see the impacts, could still see the way the Ranger captain's body jerked with each hit, but didn't fall, didn't retreat, didn't stop returning fire. The wounded men behind him were dragged to safety by other Rangers, who used those precious seconds Voss bought them with his body. By the time Kane and his SEAL element fought through the militia to reach Voss's position, 7 minutes had elapsed. 7 minutes. A lifetime and an eye blink. Daniel Voss had bled out in Kane's arms, his hands still gripping his rifle, his last words a whisper that Kane had carried for 32 years like a stone in his chest. "Tell my daughter I did my job." Kane had promised. He had gone to the funeral. He had handed the young widow the dog tags and repeated those last words, watching them land on her grief like drops of water on stone, absorbed, invisible, but permanent. He had looked at the 5-year-old girl, Ilara, standing in her black dress with her small hand clutching the folded flag, and wondered what kind of woman she would become, carrying the weight of that sacrifice. Now he knew. The file on his desk told him everything the military could quantify. Ilara Voss, 28 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, 145 pounds. Naval Academy graduate. BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, completed with honors despite being the only woman in her class. Deployed to Ramadi, Iraq, 2019. Bronze Star for valor. The citation was dry military prose, but Kane could read between the lines. 3 wounded Rangers, always Rangers with the Voss family, pinned down by enemy fire in a collapsed building. Ilara Voss, under fire for 90 minutes, extracting all 3 men one at a time, while sustaining 2 broken ribs and a concussion from an IED blast. She was her father's daughter. Same instincts. Same stubborn refusal to leave people behind. Same willingness to pay the price. But Kane needed to know more than what a file could tell him. He needed to know if she could handle not just the enemy, but the system itself. Because the enemy was honest in its hatred. It shot at you from the front. The system was insidious. It smiled while it sabotaged. It claimed fairness while rigging the game. And if Ilara Voss could not survive both, then the door would close for every woman who came after her, and the opponents of integration would have their proof, their justification, their vindication. Kane had designed this course specifically for her. He had pulled strings, called in favors, made promises to people he would rather have told to go to hell. He had handpicked every instructor, every scenario, every variable. And most importantly, he had selected Gunnery Sergeant Garrett Thorne to be her primary obstacle. Thorne was 41, a Marine Raider with a chest full of ribbons and a reputation for being old school in all the wrong ways. Gulf War veteran, multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, decorated for valor, respected by his men. He was also a known opponent of women in combat roles, vocal about it, aggressive about it. 6 months ago, Thorne had been reprimanded for creating a hostile environment for a female Marine in his previous unit. The reprimand had been a slap on the wrist, a paper trail that went nowhere. Kane had read Thorne's file the way a chess player studies an opponent. Married young to a woman who died 3 years ago from cancer. One daughter, Vanessa, 19 years old, who had just enlisted in the Army over her father's objections. Thorne was a man terrified of losing the only thing he had left, projecting that terror onto every woman in uniform, convinced that their presence was a dilution of standards, a path to catastrophe. It was personal for Thorne. That made him predictable. That made him useful. Kane had assigned Thorne as the senior enlisted man for the assault element in the final field exercise. He had assigned Alara Voss to the reconnaissance team under Lieutenant Brennan Ashford, a 26-year-old naval officer with a good pedigree. His grandfather had stormed Normandy, but no real experience, no spine yet, no confidence. The entire scenario was a pressure cooker designed to test not Ilara's physical capabilities, which Kane already knew were exceptional, but her leadership from the bottom, her ability to guide without overstepping rank, her capacity to maintain discipline when everything and everyone was screaming at her to break. And Kane would be watching it all, not intervening, not rescuing, watching. Because the world would not intervene. The world would not rescue. The world would simply judge, and the judgment had to be passed on her terms, by her actions, irrefutable and absolute. He reassembled the rifle, his hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. The bolt carrier group slid home, the charging handle locked. He performed a functions check, trigger pull, hammer fall, safety engagement. Everything worked as it should. Old weapons, if maintained properly, were more reliable than new ones. They had been tested. They had proven themselves. Alara Voss would be tested today. Whether she would prove herself remained to be seen. Kane looked at the clock on the wall. 05:30. She would arrive in 30 minutes. He walked to the window that overlooked the main gate of the Joint Special Operations Training Facility, a sprawling complex of concrete buildings and razor wire carved into the Nevada desert. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep purple, the stars fading one by one as the sun prepared to rise over the mountains. He waited. Alara Voss's hands were shaking. Not much, just a slight tremor in her fingers as they gripped the steering wheel of her truck, a barely perceptible vibration that she hated herself for. She was 5 miles from the facility, driving through the empty desert on a road so straight it looked like someone had drawn it with a ruler, and her body was betraying her with this small, involuntary admission of fear. She counted to 10, breathing slowly, pulling air deep into her diaphragm the way she had been trained. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Exhale for 4 counts. Repeat. By the count of 7, the shaking stopped. By 10, her hands were steady on the wheel, her pulse dropping back to its normal 60 beats per minute. Fear is just data, she told herself. It tells you the stakes are real. Then you put it aside and do the job. Her father's words. She could still hear his voice, the Georgia drawl softened by years in the army, the patient tone he used when he was teaching her something important. She had been 10 years old, asking him why he kept going back to the Rangers, why he kept deploying to places she couldn't pronounce, why he risked his life when he could have chosen a safer path. He had knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said those words that had become her mantra. 3 years later, he died in Mogadishu, and those words became both a comfort and a curse. A comfort because they gave her a framework for processing her fear, for transforming it into something useful. A curse because they reminded her constantly that fear was the price of duty, and duty was the only thing that made the fear worthwhile. The radio in her truck was playing the news. She caught fragments of a debate about women in combat roles, some retired general arguing that integration was proceeding too quickly, that standards were being lowered, that the presence of women was creating distractions and complications that endangered missions. She reached over and turned it off. The silence that followed somehow louder than the voices had been. Distractions and complications. As if she were a variable in an equation, rather than a soldier with a service record that spoke for itself. As if her Bronze Star had been handed to her, rather than earned in 90 minutes of hell in Ramadi. As if the 3 Rangers she had pulled from that collapsed building gave a damn about her gender when she was dragging them through enemy fire to safety. She knew what waited for her at the facility. She had done her research, talked to people who had been through the course, heard the stories. It was the hardest pipeline in the military, a multi-phase crucible designed to break everyone who entered and rebuild only those who had something unbreakable at their core. The attrition rate was 70%. Most of the washouts happened in the first 2 weeks, the instructors applying pressure until the weak spots revealed themselves, the candidates who looked good on paper but folded under real stress. Ilara had no intention of being a statistic, but she also knew that her failure would not be her failure alone. Every mistake she made would become proof that women did not belong. Every moment of weakness would be magnified, analyzed, weaponized. She was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every woman who would come after her, and that weight was crushing in a way that had nothing to do with physical load. She was so tired of carrying it. But there was no one else to carry it for her. The sun broke over the mountains as she approached the main gate, a sudden flood of golden light that turned the desert from shadow to fire in seconds. She slowed the truck, stopped at the guard station, showed her identification. The sentry, a young private who looked barely old enough to shave, checked her paperwork, glanced at her face, then back at the paperwork, as if trying to reconcile the two. "You're Captain Voss?" he said, his tone uncertain. "That's correct." "The seal?" "Is there a problem, Private?" "No, ma'am, just, we weren't expecting." He trailed off, seemed to realize he was stepping into dangerous territory, and pivoted smoothly. "Welcome to the facility, ma'am. Proceed straight ahead. Park in the lot on your left. Administration building is the second structure on your right." She thanked him and drove through the gate, her eyes tracking across the landscape of the facility. It was a brutalist masterpiece, all hard angles and functional ugliness, buildings designed for purpose rather than aesthetics. The compound was surrounded by high desert, ochre dust, jagged rock formations, sparse vegetation that looked like it was fighting a losing battle against entropy. The mountains in the distance were stark and beautiful, indifferent to human presence. This place had been here for 40 years, training the best of the best from every branch of the armed forces: SEALs, Rangers, Marine Raiders, Air Force Pararescue, Delta Force operators who, officially, did not exist. They came here to be stripped down to their essential components and rebuilt into something sharper, harder, more lethal. The facility had a reputation. It was the kind of place where legends were made or destroyed, and there was no middle ground. Ilara parked her truck and sat for a moment in the driver's seat, her hands resting on the wheel. She reached up and touched the dog tags hanging around her neck under her shirt. They were her father's, given to her by Master Chief Kane at the funeral 32 years ago. She had worn them every day since. They were warm from her body heat, the metal edges worn smooth by decades of contact with her skin. She pulled them out and looked at them. Captain Daniel Voss, U.S. Army Rangers, blood type O positive, Protestant. "I'm here, Dad," she whispered to the silent truck. "I don't know if this is what you wanted for me, but it's what I want." so I'm going to do it right. She tucked the tags back under her shirt, opened the door, and stepped out into the Nevada morning. The air was cool, would be for another 2 hours before the sun turned the desert into a blast furnace. She reached into the back of the truck and pulled out her rifle case, unzipped it, and removed her Mark 18 CQBR, close quarters battle receiver, the weapon of choice for SEAL operators in urban environments. Even here, even now, she performed the ritual of the functions check. It was muscle memory, a meditation, a connection to the fundamentals that did not change regardless of circumstances. She pulled the charging handle, locked the bolt to the rear, and inspected the chamber. Empty. Clear. She released the bolt, let it slam home with a metallic crack that echoed across the parking lot. She pressed the magazine release, catching the empty magazine as it dropped, then reinserted it with a sharp click. She pulled the trigger, felt the hammer fall, a clean break with no creep, no overtravel. 4.5 pounds of pressure, smooth and crisp. The rifle was a precision instrument. 10.3-inch barrel, 5.56 millimeter NATO. 1-to-7 twist rate optimized for 77-grain open-tip match ammunition. She had an Aimpoint Comp M5 red dot optic mounted on the upper receiver. 2 minute of angle dot, battery life of 50,000 hours. The trigger was a Geisley Super Semi-Automatic, the gold standard for accuracy and reliability. She knew every specification of this weapon. She knew the ballistic coefficient of her preferred ammunition, knew the muzzle velocity, knew the trajectory drop at every 100-meter interval, out to 600 meters. She knew because ballistics did not care about politics. Physics was honest. If she did everything correctly, proper sight alignment, proper sight picture, proper breathing, proper trigger press, the bullet would go exactly where she aimed it. That was the only fairness she would find in this place, and she would take it. She slung the rifle across her chest, locked her truck, and walked toward the administration building. The sun was climbing higher now, the shadows shortening, the temperature beginning to rise. She could feel the weight of observation, the sense that she was being watched. She did not look around to find the observers. She kept her eyes forward, her stride steady, her posture neutral. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her uncertain. The door to the administration building opened before she reached it. A man stepped out, silhouetted against the interior lights, and for a moment, Ilara could not see his face. Then he moved forward into the sunlight, and she recognized him immediately, even though she had not seen him since she was 5 years old. Master Chief Aldrich Kane. Older now, his hair white, his face carved with deep lines that mapped decades of sun and salt and stress. But his eyes were the same, hard and clear, the color of winter ice, eyes that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. He stopped 3 paces from her, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture parade ground perfect despite his age. "Captain Voss," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Master Chief Kane," she replied, coming to attention. "At ease. Walk with me." He turned and began walking along the perimeter of the parking lot, not toward the building, but away from it. Ilara fell into step beside him, matching his pace, saying nothing. She had learned long ago that when a senior enlisted man wanted to talk, you let him dictate the terms. They walked in silence for 30 seconds. The only sound, the crunch of gravel under their boots. Kane stopped at the edge of the compound, looking out at the desert and the mountains beyond. Ilara stopped beside him, waiting. "I knew your father," Kane said finally, not looking at her. "Mogadishu, 1993. I was there." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had not known, had not expected. Her father never talked about Mogadishu, and after he died, her mother had been unable to speak of it without breaking down. The official reports were sanitized, clinical, devoid of the human details that made the difference between knowledge and understanding. "You were there," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "SEAL liaison to the Ranger element. I was 50 meters away when he went down. Took me 7 minutes to fight through to his position. By the time I got there," Kane paused, and for the first time, Ilara saw something crack in the old man's composure, some ancient grief surfacing briefly before he forced it back down. "By the time I got there, it was over. He died in my arms." Ilara's throat tightened. She focused on her breathing, on maintaining control, on not allowing the emotion to show on her face. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. "His last words," Kane continued, his voice rough, were, "Tell my daughter I did my job." I went to his funeral. I gave those dog tags to your mother, and I gave you that message. You probably don't remember. "I remember," Ilara said quietly. "I was 5, but I remember." Kane turned to face her directly. "You're wearing them now, aren't you? His tags." She nodded. "Good. You should." He looked at her with those ice chip eyes, evaluating, measuring, judging. "I read your file. Ramadi. 3 extractions under fire, broken ribs, concussion. You kept going, just like he would have." "I did my job, Master Chief." "Yes, you did." Kane was silent for a long moment, then said something that turned Ilara's understanding of her presence here on its axis. "I requested you for this course." She stared at him. "You requested me?" "Specifically, by name. I pulled strings, called in favors, made it happen." "Why?" Kane's expression did not change. "Because in 6 months, I retire, and before I go, I need to answer a question that's been eating at me for 5 years. Can the future fight as hard as the past? Can a woman not just survive this pipeline, but prove she belongs in it beyond any doubt? I needed to know, and you're the one who's going to give me that answer." Ilara felt a cold understanding settle over her. "This is a test." "Everything is a test, Captain. The question is whether you pass or fail. And I should tell you, I've stacked the deck against you. There's a gunnery sergeant in this course, Garrett Thorne, Marine Raider, old school, hostile to integration. He's going to make your life hell. There's a lieutenant, Brennan Ashford, who's green and scared and will defer to you when he should be leading, putting you in impossible positions. And there's a final field exercise that I've designed specifically to push you past every limit you think you have. Why are you telling me this? Because your father died not knowing if his sacrifice meant anything. I'm giving you the chance to make it mean something. But you need to understand, if you fail, it's not just your failure. It's ammunition for every person who wants to close the door on women in special operations. You're not fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who comes after. That's the burden of being first." Ilara met his eyes. "I didn't ask to be first, Master Chief. Neither did your father. He just happened to be the one in position when the moment came. Same as you. Now the question is, are you Daniel Voss's daughter in name only, or in truth?" The anger flared hot and immediate in Ilara's chest, but she clamped down on it with the iron discipline that had carried her through every impossible moment of her life. Kane was testing her right now, in this parking lot, before the course even officially began. He was pushing to see if she would react emotionally, if she could be provoked. She would not give him the satisfaction. "I'll pass your test, Master Chief," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Every single part of it. And when I do, you'll have your answer." Kane's expression did not change, but she thought she saw something flicker in those ice chip eyes. Approval, maybe, or acknowledgement. "Good," he said. "Report to the barracks. You're in Building 7, Room 12. Gear issue at 0800. First formation at 0900. Dismissed." He turned and walked away, leaving Alara standing alone at the edge of the compound, the sun climbing higher, the day beginning to heat. She looked out at the desert, at the vast emptiness that surrounded this place, at the mountains that had stood here long before humans arrived, and would stand long after they were gone. She touched her father's dog tags through her shirt, feeling the outline of the metal. "I'll do my job, Dad," she whispered. "Just like you." Then she turned and walked toward the barracks, toward whatever hell Kane in this place had prepared for her. Her stride steady, her head up, her fear carefully locked away in the small box in her chest, where she kept all the things that could not be allowed to interfere with the mission. The first week was designed to break people. Alara understood that within the first 6 hours. The course operated on the principle that stress revealed truth, and the instructors applied stress the way a metallurgist applied heat, systematically, remorselessly, watching for the moment when the structure failed and the flaws became visible. The gear issue alone was an exercise in frustration. Ilara had submitted her equipment request 2 weeks prior, providing exact specifications for everything from her body armor to her boots. She was 5'6", 145 pounds. She needed small-size plates for her plate carrier, a vest in proportions that fit her frame, boots in a women's size 7. What she received was medium-sized plates, 8 pounds heavier than appropriate, a vest cut for someone 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier, and men's size 8 boots that were half a size too large. She stood in the supply room, looking at the gear laid out on the counter, her jaw tight. "There a problem, Captain?" the supply sergeant asked, his tone casual, his eyes watching her carefully. "This isn't what I requested," Alara said. "It's what we have available. I submitted my request 2 weeks ago, exact specifications. Must have gotten lost in the system. Happens sometimes. You can wear what we've got, or you can wait 2 weeks for a reorder. Your call." Alara looked at the oversized gear. The 2 large plates would restrict her breathing, slow her movement, throw off her center of balance. In a real engagement, that could be fatal. The boots would give her blisters within a mile, and blisters became infections, and infections became medical discharges. This was a test. Push back and she would be labeled difficult, entitled, unable to adapt. Accept it and she would be fighting with a deliberate handicap. She chose the third option. "I'll take what you have," she said, "but I'll need to make modifications. I assume you have a sewing kit and foam padding I can requisition." The supply sergeant blinked, surprised. "You're going to modify it yourself?" "Unless you'd prefer to do it for me, Sergeant." "That's irregular. So is issuing equipment that doesn't fit. But we all have to adapt, don't we?" She saw the corner of his mouth twitch, not quite a smile, but close. "Third drawer, left side. Take what you need." That evening, alone in her barracks room, deliberately assigned 400 meters from the mess hall, while every other candidate was within 50 meters, Alara sat on her bunk with needle and thread and foam padding and spent 3 hours modifying her gear. She cut foam to size, created improvised shims to take up the excess space in the vest, adjusted the straps to redistribute weight more effectively. She stuffed the toes of the two large boots with moleskin to prevent friction. It was not perfect, but it was functional. She did not complain. She simply adapted. Because complaining was what they expected, what they wanted, and she would not give it to them. The next day brought the rifle qualification. 400 meters, iron sights, 20 rounds, winds gusting 10 miles per hour from the west. Elara drew her weapon from the armory and immediately knew something was wrong. The rifle felt loose, the handguard shifting slightly when she applied pressure. She performed a functions check and discovered the issue. The barrel was worn, the rifling degraded, the harmonics of the weapon compromised. It was the worst rifle in the armory. She was certain of that. She could have requested a different weapon, but that would have been an admission of weakness, an acknowledgement that she needed better equipment to perform. So she took the worn rifle to the range, lay down in the prone position at the 400-meter line, and calculated the necessary corrections. Worn barrel meant inconsistent velocity. Inconsistent velocity meant unpredictable trajectory. She would have to compensate by reading each shot, adjusting on the fly, treating the rifle not as a precision instrument, but as a puzzle to be solved through observation and adaptation. The wind was gusting at 10 miles per hour, which at 400 meters with 77 grain ammunition meant approximately 8 inches of drift. But gusting meant variable, so she watched the flags, waited for the lulls, timed her shots to the moments of relative calm. First shot, high and left. She adjusted her hold, compensated for the barrel's bias. Second shot, center mass. Third shot, center mass. She found the rifle's rhythm, learned its language, made it sing despite its flaws. By the 20th round, she had a group that would have been impressive with a perfect weapon, and was exceptional with the one she had been given. The range officer, a grizzled Marine sergeant with 30 years of service, walked down to her position, studied her target through binoculars, then looked at her. "What's your wind call, Captain?" Elara sat up, her voice steady. "Winds gusting 8 to 10 miles per hour from the west, Sergeant. At 400 meters with 77 grain M262 ammunition, traveling at 2,750 feet per second. The ballistic coefficient of 0.372 gives us a time of flight of approximately 0.4 seconds. Wind deflection formula: wind velocity times time of flight times constant 0.15. 8 miles per hour equals 3.58 meters per second, resulting in approximately 6 inches of lateral drift. I held half a mil left to compensate." The sergeant stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Outstanding, Captain. That's some shooting, especially with—" He picked up her rifle, checked the barrel, saw the wear. His eyebrows rose. "Especially with this piece of shit. You draw this from the armory?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Didn't request a replacement?" "Didn't seem necessary." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You just qualified expert with a rifle that should have been deadlined 6 months ago. That's impressive. Or crazy. Possibly both." "Weapons don't fire themselves, Sergeant. The shooter makes the difference." "Yes, they do. Carry on, Captain." He walked away, and Elara allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. She had just demonstrated that she could succeed despite being given inadequate equipment. That message would ripple through the cadre. It would not stop the tests, but it would plant a seed of doubt in the minds of those who assumed she needed advantages to compete. The land navigation exercise on day 3 was where the sabotage became overt. Each candidate received a set of grid coordinates representing waypoints they needed to reach in sequence, using only map and compass, no GPS allowed. It was a fundamental skill, the bedrock of wilderness navigation, and Alara had practiced it thousands of times. She plotted her coordinates on her map using her protractor to determine the exact bearing to the first waypoint. The numbers seemed slightly off. The bearing would take her directly into a steep ravine that did not make tactical sense, but she trusted the coordinates she had been given. Military precision meant exact numbers, and she assumed the exercise was designed to test her ability to handle difficult terrain. She was wrong. 5 kilometers into the movement, navigating through the ravine, she checked her position using terrain association, matching the features she could see to the features on the map, and realized the coordinates she had been given were incorrect. Not by much, just 2 digits transposed, but enough to send her kilometers off course. Someone had changed her waypoints, deliberately. She could have turned back, returned to the start point, reported the error. That would have been the safe choice. But it would also have cost her hours, put her at the back of the pack, created a narrative that she needed do-overs and second chances. Instead, she made a decision. She pulled out her backup compass, the old Kamenga tritium model that had no batteries, no electronics, just a magnetized needle floating in liquid in the immutable laws of physics. She used terrain association to determine her actual position, plotted a new route to the correct waypoints using dead reckoning and pace counting, and began moving. It was harder. The correct route was longer, steeper, more demanding, but Alara had learned long ago that harder was often the only path to better. She maintained a steady pace, counting her steps. 122 paces equaled 100 meters at her stride length. Cross-checking her bearing every 500 meters. Reading the land the way her father had taught her when she was 12 years old and they went hiking in the Georgia mountains. She arrived at the final waypoint 25 minutes before anyone else. The instructors were surprised. They checked her route log, saw the deviations from the assigned coordinates, questioned her about it. The coordinates I was given were incorrect, Alara explained, her tone neutral. I discovered the error during movement and corrected using terrain association and compass navigation. How did you know they were incorrect? The bearing took me into a tactically unsound position. I verified using visual landmarks and determined my actual location. Then I plotted a corrected route. The senior instructor, a Special Forces colonel with combat tabs from 3 continents, studied her map, traced her route with his finger. This route is longer and harder than the assigned route. Yes, sir. And you completed it 25 minutes ahead of the next candidate. Yes, sir. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Who changed your coordinates, Captain? I don't know, sir. But you know they were changed. The probability of a 2-digit transposition error in military coordinates is statistically negligible, sir. Someone changed them. Whether through malice or incompetence, I cannot say. And you didn't report it. I adapted and overcame, sir. Seemed more efficient than filing a complaint. The colonel's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Carry on, Captain. But as Alara walked away, she heard voices behind her, low and angry. The instructors were discussing the sabotage. She did not know if they would investigate. Did not know if they would identify the culprit. She suspected they already knew. And she suspected nothing would come of it. Because proving discrimination was difficult, and creating a paper trail was dangerous. And sometimes the system protected its own, even when its own were in the wrong. It did not matter. She had passed the test. The sabotage had failed. And somewhere in this facility, someone was learning that cheap tricks would not be enough to break her. On day 5, the close quarters combat training provided her first opportunity to demonstrate capability that could not be dismissed or minimized. The instructors were teaching weapon disarms, the techniques for surviving an attack when someone had a knife and you did not. The senior instructor demonstrated the standard military combatives approach, a brutal, aggressive defense that relied on speed and pain compliance to strip the weapon and neutralize the threat. Elara watched carefully, analyzing the technique. It was effective for larger, stronger operators who could afford to trade impacts for position, but it was not optimal for someone her size. She had learned that lesson years ago in Krav Maga training in Tel Aviv, 3 months with former Israeli Special Forces instructors who taught a different philosophy. Use geometry, not force. Make the attacker's strength irrelevant through positioning and leverage. Captain Voss, you volunteer to demonstrate the defense? Elara stepped forward. The instructor held a training knife, a rubberized weapon that would leave bruises but not lacerations. He assumed an aggressive stance, telegraphing his intent to attack. Ready? Ready, sir. He lunged, the knife coming in fast toward her midsection. Elara's body moved before her mind finished processing the attack, muscle memory taking over. She stepped offline at a 45-degree angle, moving inside his power line, simultaneously controlling his wrist with a thumb-side grip that put pressure directly on the radial nerve cluster. The effect was immediate and dramatic. His hand opened involuntarily, the knife dropping. Her right hand came up in a short, controlled strike to the median nerve cluster at his elbow, hyperextending the joint. His arm locked straight, useless. She secured the knife, brought it up in a smooth arc, and placed the training blade against his throat. Total time elapsed, 1.6 seconds. The training area was silent. 50 candidates, 15 instructors, all staring. The instructor's expression was a mix of surprise and professional appreciation. She released him, stepped back, handed him the knife. "Where the hell did you learn that?" he asked. "Krav Maga, sir. Tel Aviv, 2019. 3-month intensive with former Israeli Defense Force instructors." That was... He paused, searching for words. That was not standard combatives. "No, sir. It's based on biomechanics and neurology rather than strength. When you attack the nerve clusters and compromise joint integrity, size and strength become largely irrelevant. It's physics, not force." The instructor nodded slowly. "Demonstrate it again. Slower. I want everyone to see the mechanics." She did. Broke it down step by step, explaining the angle of movement, the specific nerve she was targeting, the way the technique channeled the attacker's energy against his own structure. By the end, every person in the training area understood. This was not luck, not a fluke. This was expertise, technique refined through thousands of hours of practice, until it became as natural as breathing. One of the watching candidates was a massive Marine, 6'4", 260 pounds of muscle. He raised his hand. "Captain, would that work on someone my size?" Elara looked at him. "Want to find out?" "Yeah, actually." The instructor grinned. "Go ahead, Captain. Show him." The big Marine attacked with confidence, certain that his size would overwhelm her technique. Elara used the same sequence, same offline movement, same nerve strikes. The Marine went down to one knee, his arm locked, his face a mask of shocked pain. "Jesus," he muttered, that really works." "Physics doesn't care how much you bench press, Corporal," Elara said, releasing him. "It only cares about angles and leverage and force vectors." She saw it then, in the eyes of the men watching. Not hostility, not skepticism, respect. The kind of respect that could only be earned through demonstrated competence, through proving beyond doubt that you belonged. But she also saw something else. In the back of the group, standing apart from the others, was a man she recognized from the roster. Gunnery Sergeant Garrett Thorne, 41 years old, Marine Raider, Gulf War veteran. He was watching her with an expression of cold fury, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Their eyes met across the training area. She saw the hatred there, naked and unfiltered. And she understood with perfect clarity that Master Chief Kane had been right. Thorne was going to make her life hell. Not because she was incompetent, but because she was not. Her competence was a threat to everything he believed about women in combat, and he would do everything in his power to destroy her. Ilara held his gaze for 3 seconds, her expression neutral, giving nothing away. Then she turned back to the instructor, ready for the next demonstration, dismissing Thorne as irrelevant. But she knew he was not irrelevant. He was the next test. And unlike terrain or equipment or coordinates, he would not play fair. The confrontation came on Friday, at the end of the first week, in the mess hall during the evening meal. Ilara had survived 7 days of systematic harassment, sabotage, and stress testing. She had adapted to inadequate gear, corrected for sabotaged navigation, demonstrated combat skills that exceeded most of the male candidates. She had done everything Kane had asked and more. And Garrett Thorne had been watching all of it, his rage building like pressure in a sealed container, waiting for the moment to release. The mess hall smelled of overcooked beef and industrial disinfectant, the kind of institutional food that was designed for fuel rather than flavor. 200 operators, analysts, and support personnel filled the space with the low hum of conversation and the clatter of metal trays on metal tables. It was Friday evening, the end of the first week, and the ambient tension that had characterized every waking moment was beginning to soften as candidates contemplated the weekend break. Ilara stood in line at the serving counter, her tray held in a steady 2-handed grip, her focus on the condensation-beaded glass protecting a collection of wilted iceberg lettuce that passed for salad. She was aware of the eyes on her. She was always aware. But she had learned to tune out the stares, the whispers, the constant evaluation. She existed in a bubble of disciplined calm, present but untouchable. The bubble burst when Garrett Thorne stepped directly into her path. He was a massive presence, 6'2" and 230 pounds of muscle and indignation, his neck as thick as her thigh, his shoulders straining the fabric of his utility uniform. He planted himself between her and the salad bar like a wall, his shadow falling over her in a deliberate eclipse. Behind him, 2 other Marine Raiders flanked him slightly, Corporal Jennings and Sergeant Colton Briggs, forming a casual but unmistakable barrier. They were not looking at her. They were looking at the room, their smirks acting as a broadcast, inviting everyone to watch the show. Ilara kept her eyes on the space just over Thorne's shoulder, her posture neutral, a study in economical stillness. She did not lean away from him, nor did she crowd him. She simply occupied her space, waiting for the obstruction to move. The room's background noise began to fade. Conversations petered out into murmurs. Heads turned. Within 15 seconds, the mess hall had gone from normal evening chaos to focused silence, everyone watching the small island of confrontation at the head of the serving line. "Well, look what we have here," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble designed to carry. "The command's new pet project, our very first female candidate for the advanced tactical course." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like an accusation. "Tell me, Captain, did they lower the pull-up requirement for you, or just eliminate it altogether?" Corporal Jennings chuckled on cue, a harsh, rehearsed sound. Briggs shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Ilara did not respond. Her breathing remained slow and even, a silent metronome counting down the seconds of Thorne's monologue. She could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her back, measuring her reaction, judging her response. This was theater, performance art designed to humiliate. Thorne wanted a reaction: anger, fear, a stammered retort, anything that would prove she did not belong. Her silence seemed to fuel his irritation. He had expected resistance, some form of engagement. Her placid stillness was a canvas he could not mark, a wall his aggression could not breach. "What's wrong?" Thorne continued, taking half a step closer. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just trying to figure out which of the instructors you need to sleep with to get through the next phase?" The insult landed in the silence like a grenade. Alara heard the sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind her, someone's shock at the blatant violation of every professional standard. But she did not flinch. She did not react. She simply stood, her tray steady, her eyes fixed on the salad bar, waiting. Thorne's face flushed red. The lack of response was intolerable to him. He shifted his weight in a theatrical movement designed to invade her space further, then nudged her tray with the back of his hand. It was a small gesture, almost dismissive, testing to see if he could make her fumble, make her look flustered. The tray remained steady. Alara had anticipated the contact, adjusted her grip, lowered her center of gravity fractionally. His failure to get the desired reaction flickered across his face as frustration. It was time, apparently, for a more direct approach. With a sudden, jerky movement, Thorne bumped her hard with his shoulder, his mass connecting with hers with deliberate force. The tray tilted violently. A scoop of mashed potatoes and a ladle of brown gravy slid off the side, landing with a wet splat on the polished concrete floor between them. Jennings snickered. The mess hall was now completely silent, every eye locked on them. "Oh, what a shame," Thorne said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He looked down at the mess on the floor, then back up at her. "See, you've got to keep your head on a swivel out here, Captain. This is a dangerous place." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that was still loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Things get dropped. People get hurt. Maybe you should just pack your bags and go home before something serious happens to you." To punctuate his point, he placed his hand on her shoulder. It was not a friendly touch. It was not even a neutral touch. The pressure of his fingers was heavy, proprietary, a physical assertion of dominance. It was a violation of protocol, a clear escalation from verbal harassment to unwanted physical contact. He was staking a claim, marking territory, using her body to demonstrate his power. Lieutenant Brennan Ashford stood 10 feet away, his face pale, his mouth opening as if to intervene, but the words caught in his throat. To challenge Thorne here, in front of everyone, was to invite retribution, to mark himself as weak, to become the next target. So he stood, frozen, a silent, ashamed accomplice to what was happening. Master Chief Kane sat at a table across the room, his coffee mug raised halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowed to slits. He made no move to intervene. This was the test. This was the moment. He needed to know what Alara Voss was made of, needed to see if she could handle this level of aggression without administrative intervention. The hand on her shoulder was a lit fuse. Alara's world did not shrink to the point of contact. It expanded. She became hyper-aware of everything, the precise pressure of each of Thorne's 5 fingers on her clavicle and trapezius muscle, the angle of his arm, the slight bend in his elbow, the way his weight was distributed forward onto his lead foot. She registered the scent of the spilled gravy, the sudden chill of air conditioning on her neck, the focused silence of the room, the shift in Ashford's breathing behind her. Her mind was not a whirlwind of anger or fear. It was a calm, cold diagnostic engine assessing threat, calculating variables, selecting response. The objective was not to harm, not to punish, but to neutralize the immediate physical threat with overwhelming mechanical superiority while maintaining absolute discipline. Her first movement was nearly invisible. She exhaled slowly, and as she did, her center of gravity dropped by less than an inch. Simultaneously, she rotated her shoulders a fraction of a degree to her left. This subtle shift changed the geometry of his hold. The pressure of his hand was no longer bearing straight down on her shoulder, but was now directed at an oblique angle across her body. His force, meant to pin her, became a vector she could redirect. Her left hand, which had been supporting the tray, moved with fluid speed. It was not a strike. It was a precise, almost delicate placement. Her fingers wrapped around his wrist, her thumb finding the sensitive bundle of nerves and tendons on the inside of his forearm, the radial nerve cluster, the same target she had demonstrated in close quarters combat training. Her right hand came up smoothly, taking the tray and placing it on the serving line railing without a sound. All of this took less than 1 second. Thorne felt a sudden, bewildering change. The solid purchase he had on her shoulder was gone. He felt her move, but it was like trying to grab smoke. Before his brain could process what was happening, her hand was on his wrist. And it was not a panicked grab. It was a grip of impossible strength, like a steel clamp locking onto bone. Then came the pressure from her thumb. It was not a blunt, crushing force. It was a sharp, searing fire that shot up his arm, instantly extinguishing all strength from his fingers to his shoulder. His hand, which had been a tool of intimidation, went numb and useless. A grunt of surprised pain escaped his lips. He tried to pull his arm back, a reflexive, panicked motion. But Alara used his momentum against him. She pivoted on the ball of her right foot, turning with his pull, adding her own body weight to the motion. It was a principle of physics, not a contest of strength. He was a charging bull, and she was the matador's cape, effortlessly redirecting his mass. His forward-leaning posture became his undoing. With his arm locked and his balance compromised, he had no choice but to follow the path she dictated. He stumbled forward, his body contorting to relieve the excruciating pressure on his wrist. She did not throw him. A throw would have been theatrical, an act of aggression. Instead, she guided him, her control absolute. She bent her knees, lowering their combined center of gravity, and continued the circular motion. Thorne's feet tangled. He crashed not to the floor, but onto one knee, his body twisted at an awkward angle, his head bowed. The entire sequence was silent, fluid, devastatingly efficient. He was kneeling at her feet, his arm held immobile, his face a mask of shock, pain, and dawning humiliation. The mess hall was so quiet that the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead sounded like a roar. Alara leaned in close, her voice a low, calm whisper, audible only to him. "You are correct, Gunnery Sergeant. People do get hurt here." She applied a micropulse of pressure to his wrist, just enough to make his vision swim. "Please remove your hand." She opened her fingers, releasing him. The connection was broken. Thorne scrambled backward, pulling his arm to his chest as if it had been burned, cradling it against his body. His face was a mottled canvas of furious red and pale white. He looked up at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. In that moment, in front of the entire training cadre, he had been completely and totally dismantled. Not by superior force, but by superior technique. He was not begging for his life, but in the silent, gaping expression on his face, in the utter stripping away of his authority and physical dominance, there was a plea for it all to be a bad dream. He had been revealed as a clumsy amateur. The quiet woman he had targeted was the professional. Master Chief Kane materialized at Thorne's side before the gunnery sergeant could fully regain his feet. There was no shouting, no public reprimand. Kane simply spoke in a low, cold voice, his words inaudible to everyone else, but their effect was plain to see. Thorne's face, which had been contorted with rage, went slack with a kind of dreadful understanding. He had not just been put in his place physically. His career had just taken a sharp downward turn. Kane allowed Thorne to remain in the course. Perhaps he believed the humiliation was a more effective teacher than dismissal. Or perhaps he wanted to see what would happen next. The tension, far from being resolved, had simply been compressed into a denser, more dangerous form. Thorne now watched Alara with venomous hatred, his public humiliation festering into private obsession. 2 days later, the final phase of training began. The briefing room was sterile and windowless, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the faces of the assembled candidates. Master Chief Kane stood at the front, a topographical map of the Nevada mountains projected on the screen behind him. His voice was crisp, professional, carrying the weight of decades of operational experience. Final exercise, he announced. Multi-day field operation, simulated reconnaissance and direct action mission. Objective: infiltrate designated area of operations. Locate and surveil high-value target concealed in cave system. Establish observation post and relay intelligence to Tactical Operations Center. Assault element will stage at secondary position, await signal for coordinated raid. He clicked to the next slide, showing terrain features. Area of operations: Nevada Test and Training Range, Sector 9. Elevation 7,500 to 11,000 feet. High desert mountain environment. Terrain is unforgiving. Temperature extremes. Limited water sources. You will be carrying all supplies for 72 hours. Another click. Weather forecast. Current meteorological analysis shows stable, high-pressure system. Clear skies forecast for the next 72 hours. No precipitation expected. Winds light and variable. Alara, sitting in the third row, looked at the weather slide and felt a prickle of unease. She had checked the sky that morning during her run. She had seen the clouds building on the northern horizon, thick and dark, the kind of formation that indicated a major front moving in. The official forecast did not match what her eyes had told her. She watched Kane's face as he delivered the weather brief. His expression was neutral, professional, but his eyes flickered once toward the window, toward those distant clouds, and Alara saw something there. Knowledge. Deliberate omission. He was lying about the weather. She said nothing. If this was part of the test, calling him out publicly would accomplish nothing. She would simply prepare for what she knew was coming. Team assignments, Kane continued. Lieutenant Ashford will lead reconnaissance element. 4 personnel: Ashford, Captain Voss, Private Garrett, Specialist Reynolds. Primary task: surveillance and intelligence gathering. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne will command assault element. 6 personnel, all Marines. You will stage 2 kilometers south, await go signal from TOC. Alara processed this information carefully. She was being placed under a green officer. separated from direct observation, partnered with inexperienced operators. And Thorne would be close enough to interfere, but far enough that Kane could claim separation of elements. The deck was stacked, exactly as Kane had promised. Equipment issue at 1300 hours. Helicopter insertion at 0200 tomorrow. Questions? No one spoke. Dismissed. At the equipment issue, Alara drew her standard loadout. PRC-152 tactical radio for encrypted communications, AN/PVS-31 dual-tube night vision device, Garmin Fortrex 701 GPS receiver, surveillance sensors, standard rations, and water. But she also drew items that made the supply sergeant raise an eyebrow: a Kamenga tritium compass, waterproof map case, Silva Ranger backup compass, protractor, and 3 sets of laminated topographic maps. "Don't trust the GPS, Captain?" the supply sergeant asked. "I trust Murphy's Law, Sergeant," Alara replied. "Technology fails when you need it most." She spent the afternoon meticulously preparing. She waterproofed her maps using the clear plastic cases, marked primary and alternate routes, identified terrain features she could use for navigation if electronics failed. She checked her compass against known bearings, verified its accuracy. She calculated magnetic declination for the area, 12 degrees east, and made notes on her map margins. She prepared as if she knew every piece of technology would fail, because she suspected that was exactly what Kane had planned. That evening, she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her father's dog tags warm against her skin. She thought about Mogadishu, about her father dying in Kane's arms, about last words that had shaped her entire life. She thought about Thorne's hatred, about Ashford's fear, about the storm she knew was coming despite the official forecast. Tomorrow would test everything she was. And she would pass, because failure was not an option. The helicopters lifted off at 0200 under a sky that had already begun to change. The stars were disappearing behind a scrim of high clouds, and the air had the electric quality that preceded major weather events. Ilara sat in the troop compartment of the MH-60 Blackhawk, her rifle between her knees, watching Ashford's nervous face in the red interior light. The lieutenant was 26, grandson of a Normandy veteran, but he had never led a real operation. This was his first time as element leader, and the responsibility sat on him like a physical weight. His hands kept checking his equipment, his GPS, his radio, compulsive movements that betrayed his anxiety. "You'll be fine, sir," Alara said quietly, leaning close to be heard over the rotor noise. Ashford looked at her, startled that she had spoken. "How do you know?" "Because you're thinking ahead. Nervous is good. Complacent gets people killed. I don't want to screw this up." "Then listen to your people, use the skills you've been taught, and make decisions based on information, not fear. That's leadership." He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Your father was a ranger, right? Mogadishu?" "Yes, sir. Master Chief Kane told me. Said he died covering his team's withdrawal." Alara's throat tightened. "He did. I'm sorry. That must have been hard growing up without him." "It was, but it also taught me something important. He didn't die because he was fearless. He died because he chose duty over survival. That's the choice we all make when we put on the uniform. We accept that the mission might cost us everything, and we do it anyway." Ashford was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll try to make good decisions out there. I promise." "That's all anyone can ask, sir." The helicopter descended into a narrow valley, the pilots using night vision to navigate the terrain. Fast ropes deployed, and the team slid down into darkness, boots hitting rocky ground with muffled impacts. The helicopters pulled away immediately, their rotor wash creating a miniature dust storm that subsided into silence as they disappeared over the ridgeline. Alara pulled down her night vision, and the world transformed into shades of green. She could see the terrain clearly now, the rocky slopes, the sparse vegetation, the massive bulk of the mountains rising on all sides. She took a knee, oriented her map, identified their position using terrain association. "Sir, we're here," she said quietly to Ashford, pointing to a spot on his map. "Bearing to the observation post is 045 degrees. Distance 3.2 kilometers. Recommend we move in a tactical column. Maintain noise discipline. Check in every 15 minutes." Ashford studied the map, cross-referenced with his GPS. "Agreed. You have point, Captain. Lead us in." The movement was smooth and professional. Alara navigated using her night vision and terrain features, maintaining a steady pace that conserved energy. She used pace counting. 122 steps equaled 100 meters at her stride length, and verified her position every 500 meters using visual landmarks. Private Garrett and Specialist Reynolds followed in her wake, disciplined and quiet. They reached the observation post location 4 hours later, just as the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. It was a perfect position, good visibility of the target cave system, natural cover from rock formations, concealed from casual observation. Alara began deploying her surveillance equipment. The sensor suite was sophisticated technology. FLIR thermal camera that could detect heat signatures at 1,800 meters. Ground-based seismic sensors placed at 50-meter intervals around their position. Laser rangefinder for precise distance measurement. She aimed the laser at the cave entrance and got an exact reading. 923 meters. She established the encrypted data link to the Tactical Operations Center, verified signal strength, and began streaming video. In the TOC, Kane would be watching every pixel, evaluating every decision. "Recon 1, this is TOC. How copy?" Kane's voice came through her earpiece, clear and professional.
TOC Recon 1, good copy. In position. Surveillance package deployed. Have eyes on objective.
"Copy, Recon 1. Assault 2 is holding at phase line Delta. Continue mission. Good work." The sun rose over the mountains, turning the desert from shadow to gold. The temperature began to climb. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. For 6 hours, they maintained perfect surveillance. Ashford coordinated with Thorne's assault element, relaying intelligence, maintaining communication schedules. The target, a role player acting as a high-value individual, moved in and out of the cave system on a predictable pattern. They gathered excellent intelligence. The mission was textbook. Then Alara checked her barometer. The small digital display on her watch showed atmospheric pressure. 1,012 millibars. She had checked it an hour ago. 1,020 millibars. 8 millibars drop in 60 minutes. That was catastrophic. That was a major weather system moving in fast. She looked at the sky. The high clouds had thickened, turned dark gray, begun to build into towering formations. The wind had picked up, gusting across the ridgeline with increasing violence. The temperature was dropping rapidly. "Sir," she said quietly to Ashford, "we have a problem." "What problem?" "Weather. Pressure's dropping fast, 8 millibars in the last hour. Those clouds are cumulonimbus development, major front moving in. We have maybe 90 minutes before it hits." Ashford looked at the sky, then at his GPS weather display. TOC said stable conditions. Forecast was clear for 72 hours. TOC is reading satellite data from hours ago. I'm reading the atmosphere now. That's a severe storm forming, sir. We need to prepare for worst-case scenario. You think TOC is wrong? I think weather changes faster than forecasts update. And I think we should trust what we can see over what a computer tells us. Ashford chewed his lip, uncertain. He was caught between official information and on-ground observation, between trusting the system and trusting his operator. It was a test of his judgment, and Alara could see him struggling with it. Before he could decide, the world changed. The sky turned the color of a bruise, purple-gray and malevolent. The wind stopped gusting and began to howl, a sustained roar that bent the scrub brush horizontal. The temperature plummeted. Alara watched her thermometer drop 15 degrees in 10 minutes. The first drops of rain were as cold as ice, and within seconds they intensified into a torrential downpour that turned the dust to slick mud. Then came the lightning. The bolt struck a ridge 200 meters away, the crack of thunder simultaneous with the flash, so loud it felt like a physical blow. Alara's entire sensor suite exploded in sparks and smoke. Her radio went dead. Her GPS screen went black. Every piece of electronic equipment they had carried into the field was instantly fried by the electromagnetic pulse from the lightning strike. They were cut off, blind, alone. TOC, this is Recon 1. How copy? Ashford was shouting into his dead radio, his voice rising with panic. TOC, we have total equipment failure. Request immediate extraction. Static. Nothing but static. Alara was already moving, securing her gear, checking on Garrett and Reynolds. Then she heard it. A deep, grinding roar from above them, growing louder, the sound of the earth itself tearing apart. "Rock slide," she screamed. "Move!" The team scattered. A massive wall of rock and mud came crashing down the mountainside, a churning, unstoppable wave of debris that obliterated the valley floor below them, completely destroying the infiltration route they had used and their planned exfiltration path. They were trapped between the rock slide below and the mountain above, and the storm was just getting started. The rain turned to sleet, then to driving snow. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The world became a white chaos of howling wind and stinging ice. The temperature continued to drop. Alara's thermometer now read 28 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. Hypothermia was no longer a theoretical risk. It was an imminent threat. "Sir, we need shelter!" Alara shouted, to be heard over the wind. "We can't stay exposed." Ashford was trying his GPS again, desperately pressing buttons on the dead device. "It's not working. Nothing's working. How do we even know where we are?" "I know where we are, sir." "How?" "Because I was paying attention." Alara pulled out her waterproof map case, unfolded the laminated topographic map. She had been tracking their position throughout the movement, marking waypoints, verifying landmarks. She pulled out her Kamenga compass, the mechanical device that required no batteries, no satellites, no electronics. Just a magnetized needle and the Earth's magnetic field. Emergency strobes appeared through the snow. Thorne's assault element, fighting their way up from their staging position, drawn by the last radio transmission before communications failed. Thorne emerged from the whiteout, his face thunderous with rage and fear. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. "Lightning strike," Alara replied. "Fried all electronics. Rockslide cut off the valley. We're trapped." "Then we push through." Thorne pointed down valley. "We follow this terrain down. It has to lead somewhere. We move now or we freeze to death." "Negative," Alara said, her voice cutting through the wind. "That valley terminates in a 200-foot cliff according to the topographic map. Moving blind in these conditions is suicide." "Your precious map could be wrong." "Physics can't be wrong, Gunnery Sergeant. Elevation contour lines don't lie. That valley is a death trap. Thorne's Marines were looking between their sergeant and Alara, their faces showing the first signs of hypothermia, confusion, fear, the desperate hope that someone would make a decision that led to survival. Some of them wanted to follow Thorne, to do something, anything, rather than stand still in the freezing hell. Ashford stood frozen, paralyzed by indecision, looking from his dead GPS to Alara's map to Thorne's furious face. "Lieutenant," Alara said quietly but firmly, "you need to make a command decision. Now." He looked at her, and she saw something shift in his eyes, fear transforming into determination, his grandfather's blood awakening. "Sergeant Voss, what do you recommend?" The question hung in the air. Thorne's face went purple with rage. Ashford had just yielded tactical command to an enlisted operator, in front of everyone, explicitly asking for her guidance. Alara pointed to a spot on her map. 2 kilometers, bearing 065 degrees. There's a structure marked here. Shepherd's hut, stone construction. It will provide shelter from the wind, a chance to consolidate and wait out the storm. Once conditions improve, we can find a safe route down. "That's assuming it still exists," Thorne snapped. "That map could be decades old." "It's our best option, Gunny," Sergeant Briggs said quietly, Thorne's own second-in-command contradicting him. "We can't stay here. We can't go down. We have to try for shelter." Ashford made his choice. "Sergeant Voss, you have the lead. Get us to that hut." Alara pulled out her compass, took a bearing, oriented the map. Bearing 065 degrees. Distance 2.1 kilometers. Maintain 10-foot intervals. Sound off every minute. Let's move. She stepped out from behind the rock outcropping and into the storm, her pace deliberate, her focus absolute. For a frozen moment, no one moved. They watched her small figure start to disappear into the whiteout, leading with nothing but a map and a compass and absolute confidence. Then Private Garrett pushed himself to his feet and fell in behind her. Then Reynolds. Then Briggs. One by one, the men made their choice. They followed the calm, quiet operator with a map and a plan, leaving their raging gunnery sergeant standing alone in the snow. With a final choked curse, Thorne fell in at the rear of the column. His authority was shattered. His humiliation was complete. He was no longer leading. He was following. And deep in the Tactical Operations Center, Master Chief Kane listened to the fragmentary communications on a backup frequency that could receive but not transmit. He heard Ashford's decision. He heard Alara take command without taking command, guiding without overstepping, leading from the bottom. He looked at the photo of Daniel Voss on his desk. "Your daughter's doing fine, Danny," he said quietly. "Better than fine. Now let's see if she can bring them all home." The trek to the shepherd's hut was an ordeal that compressed lifetimes into 2 kilometers. Every step was a battle against wind that tried to knock them off their feet, against snow that blinded and disoriented, against cold that crept into bones and made simple thoughts feel like complex equations. Alara led them through the whiteout with her compass held steady in one hand and her map in the other, both protected by her body from the wind that tried to rip them away. She called out bearings every 2 minutes, her voice cutting through the storm. "Bearing holding 065, interval check, sound off." 1, Garrett's voice close behind her. 2, Reynolds. 3, Briggs. The count continued down the line. 12 voices in the chaos, each one confirming they were still connected, still moving, still alive. When the count reached 12, Alara would take her next bearing, verify their course, and push forward another 100 meters. She was navigating by dead reckoning and terrain association, reading the slope of the land beneath her feet, the direction of the wind, the subtle shifts in elevation that told her they were crossing the ridgeline she had memorized from the map. 1 kilometer in, Private Garrett stumbled. Alara caught it immediately, the way his feet were dragging, the slur in his voice when he called out his number. She dropped back, grabbed his arm, looked at his face. His eyes were unfocused, his speech was mumbled. Moderate hypothermia, core temperature around 92 degrees. If it dropped to 90, he would lose consciousness. If it dropped to 88, his heart would stop. "Sir," she called to Ashford, "Garrett's hypothermic. We need to keep him moving, keep him generating heat. Reynolds, stay on his left. Briggs, take his right. Keep him between you, match his pace. Don't let him fall behind." They formed a human bracket around Garrett, practically carrying him while making it look like he was walking. It was a technique Alara had learned in survival training. Preserve dignity while providing support, because shame could kill motivation as surely as cold could kill the body. At kilometer 1.5, Garrett collapsed entirely. One moment he was shuffling forward, the next he was on his knees in the snow, then on his side, his eyes rolling back. His core temperature had dropped past the critical threshold. He was shutting down. Thorne's voice cut through the storm. "We mark his position and come back after the storm passes. We can't risk 11 men for one." Alara was already kneeling beside Garrett, checking his pulse. Weak, 48 beats per minute. Respirations shallow, 8 per minute. She looked up at Thorne through the driving snow. "We don't leave our people, Gunnery Sergeant." "That's not your call to make, Captain. That's a command decision." "You're right, it is." Alara looked at Ashford. "Sir?" Ashford stood in the snow, his face pale, the weight of command pressing down on him. This was the moment Kane had designed the entire exercise around, the point where the young officer had to choose between pragmatism and principle, between the easy path and the right one. 11 men standing, 1 man down. The mathematics of survival versus the ethos of the warrior. Ashford's grandfather had stormed Normandy Beach under machine gun fire, had seen friends cut down by the dozens, had kept moving forward because that was what soldiers did. That blood was in Ashford's veins. The question was whether he could access it. "We carry him," Ashford said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "We don't leave anyone behind." "That's not a suggestion, Gunny. That's an order." Alara was already stripping Garrett's non-essential gear, redistributing weight to other members of the team. She fashioned an improvised fireman's carry, getting him across her shoulders. 185 pounds of dead weight, plus his remaining gear. She stood, her legs shaking with the effort, and took a step forward. "Sergeant," Briggs said, moving to her side. "Let me take half." Together, they created a 2-person carry, sharing Garrett's weight between them. 50 meters later, Reynolds rotated in, then another Marine. They took turns, each person carrying until exhaustion forced them to pass the burden to the next. It was brutal. It was inefficient. It added 30 minutes to their movement time, but no one suggested leaving him again. Thorne watched this in silence, his jaw working, his hands clenched. When it was his turn in the rotation, he took Garrett's weight without a word. He was no longer arguing. He was following. And somewhere in the core of his rage, a small seed of doubt had been planted about everything he thought he knew. At kilometer 2.1, a dark shape emerged from the swirling snow. Low, solid, the angles wrong for a natural formation. Ilara's heart surged with relief so intense it was almost painful. The shepherd's hut, exactly where the map said it would be. It was a crude structure of stacked, unmortared stone with a sod roof, built into the side of the mountain to shelter it from prevailing winds. Small, dark, smelling of damp earth and old wood smoke. But it had 4 walls and a roof, and the wind could not reach them inside. They practically fell through the door, a mass of exhausted, shivering bodies collapsing into the relative warmth of shelter. The relief was so profound that several men simply lay where they fell, too spent to move further. Ilara was already working. She directed Garrett to be placed near the center of the space, removed his wet outer layers, wrapped him in a vapor barrier improvised from a poncho, and had 2 men lie on either side of him to share body heat. She found old, dry wood stacked against one wall and used a fire starter to coax a small flame to life in the blackened circle of rocks that served as a hearth. The fire was tiny, more psychological comfort than actual warmth, but it was enough. The temperature inside the hut was still barely above freezing, but it was 30 degrees warmer than outside. That margin was the difference between survival and death. As their bodies began to thaw and the immediate danger of freezing receded, a new tension filled the small space. 12 armed operators crammed into a stone box, exhausted, frightened, with a broken chain of command and simmering resentments. The storm still howled outside, trapping them together. Thorne sat in the corner, silent and sullen, cleaning his rifle with furious, jerky movements. He refused to look at anyone, especially Ilara. The humiliation of being overruled, of being proven wrong, of watching enlisted personnel and junior officers defer to a female captain instead of him, it was all there on his face, curdled into something toxic and dangerous. Ilara was checking Garrett's vital signs when she heard it. A sound from outside, muffled by the stone walls and the wind, but distinct. Voices. Speaking English but with rough accents, the kind born of hard living in hard places. And they were getting closer. She held up one hand, palm out, the universal signal for silence. Every man in the hut froze, hands moving automatically to weapons. The voices grew louder, footsteps crunching in snow. Multiple people, at least 3, probably more, moving toward the hut with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. This was their shelter. They had been using it, and they were coming back. Ilara moved silently to the door, positioned herself to the side where she would not be immediately visible when it opened. She drew her sidearm, Sig Sauer M17, 9mm, 15-round magazine, and held it low and ready. Across the room, she saw Ashford doing the same, his face pale but determined. Briggs had his rifle up, covering the door. The hut transformed from a shelter into a tactical position in seconds. The wooden door crashed open, and 3 figures stumbled inside, silhouetted against the gray light of the storm. They were dressed in rough civilian clothing, heavy parkas and boots, their faces reddened by wind and cold. They carried rifles, AR-pattern weapons, commercial variants, the kind you could buy at any gun store in America. Their eyes widened in shock as they registered the room full of military personnel. For one frozen heartbeat, everyone stared at each other in mutual disbelief. American military operators in the middle of nowhere. Civilians with rifles in a storm that should have kept everyone indoors. The coincidence was impossible, which meant it was not a coincidence at all. Then the moment shattered. One of the newcomers shouted, "Shit, Federal!" and raised his rifle. Thorne reacted with the only tool he possessed, pure head-on aggression. He launched himself across the small hut like a missile, 230 pounds of muscle and rage, closing the distance in less than 2 seconds. He crashed into the first man, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs and weapons, hitting the floor hard enough to shake the walls. The hut erupted into chaos. The second intruder swung his rifle at Ashford, who barely got his arm up in time to deflect the blow. The impact sent him staggering backward, and the two men grappled for control of the weapon, crashing into the wall. The third intruder pulled a knife from his belt, a fixed-blade hunting knife with a 7-inch blade, and moved toward the struggling mass on the floor where Thorn and the first man were locked in a desperate wrestling match. Ilara did not charge. She moved like smoke along the wall, using the darkness and confusion as cover, her mind processing the chaos not as a single overwhelming threat, but as a series of distinct mechanical problems that required specific solutions. She saw the man with the knife, saw his eyes locked on Thorn's exposed back, saw his trajectory, his intent, the geometry of the attack forming in real time. She had perhaps 2 seconds before that blade went into Thorn's kidney. She intercepted him with fluid economy of motion, stepping inside his weapon's effective range before he registered her presence. Her left hand clamped onto his right shoulder, arresting his forward momentum. Her right arm snaked around his neck in a smooth, practiced motion, bicep against one carotid artery, the blade of her forearm against the other. The rear naked choke, the vascular neck restraint. Not a true choke that crushed the trachea, but a blood strangle that cut off circulation to the brain. 11 pounds of pressure per square inch, applied at exactly the right angle. She locked her hands together behind his head, dropped her weight to lower their combined center of gravity, and squeezed. The man struggled for 3 seconds, his movements becoming increasingly frantic and uncoordinated as oxygen deprivation shut down his higher brain functions. The knife fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering on the stone floor. His body went limp, unconscious but still breathing. Ilara lowered him gently to the ground, checked his pulse to confirm he would recover, then turned back to assess the remaining threats. The second intruder had broken free from Ashford and was bringing his rifle around toward the struggling figures on the floor. Ilara could not shoot. Ashford was directly in her line of fire, and beyond him were her own people. She grabbed the metal cup from beside the fire and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the man in the temple, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but hard enough to make him flinch and lose his sight picture. Ashford used that half-second of distraction. He tackled the man from the side, and they went down together, the rifle clattering free. They rolled across the floor in a tangle, neither man gaining advantage, both fighting with the desperate strength of people who understood this was life or death. On the floor, Thorn had managed to get on top of his opponent, pinning the man's arms with his knees, gaining what he thought was a dominant position. But his opponent was wiry and desperate, and he managed to squirm one hand free. That hand went to his belt, came back with another knife. They all had knives, Ilara realized. These were people who lived hard lives in hard places, and the blade flashed up toward Thorn's throat. Thorn caught the man's wrist, barely, his face contorted with effort as he tried to force the knife away. But he was exhausted from the march, his strength depleted, his position compromised. The knife descended slowly, inevitably, moving toward his throat despite his desperate resistance. The point touched skin, crest, drew a thin line of blood. Thorn froze, his eyes going wide, the realization of his own mortality dawning on his face with terrible clarity. His strength had failed him. His aggression had failed him. He was going to die on this floor, killed by a smuggler with a knife, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His eyes found Ilara across the hut, and in them she saw something she had never expected to see from Garrett Thorn. Plea. desperation, the unspoken begging of a man who did not want to die. Ilara moved before the conscious decision fully formed in her mind. 3 steps put her in position. Her SIG M17 came up, the red dot of the reflex sight finding the smuggler's temple. She pressed the muzzle against his skull, cold steel against warm flesh, the universal language of immediate lethal force. "Drop it," she said, her voice absolutely calm. The man froze, the knife still pressed against Thorne's throat but no longer moving. Thorne's voice, raw and desperate. "Shoot him. Do it now. That's an order." Ilara did not move the pistol, did not increase pressure, did not look at Thorne. She kept her eyes locked on the smuggler, reading his face, assessing his state of mind. She saw fear there, saw desperation, saw a man who had made bad choices and was now facing their consequences. But she also saw something else. The understanding that he was beaten, that continuing this fight meant certain death, that surrender was the only path that led to seeing tomorrow. This was not a soldier. This was not a hardened terrorist or a trained insurgent. This was a criminal, probably a militia member or survivalist running illegal weapons through the mountains, using the storm as cover. He was dangerous, yes. He had threatened her people, yes. But the rules of engagement were clear. Minimum necessary force. And minimum necessary force was a gun to his head and 2 words, not a bullet. "I won't repeat myself," Ilara said, applying the slightest increase in pressure to make the muzzle dig into his temple. "Drop the knife." The smuggler's hand opened. The knife hit the floor with a metallic clink that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "Hands behind your head. Interlock your fingers." He complied. Ilara stepped back, maintaining her sight picture, and kicked the knife away. "Briggs, secure him. Zip ties." Briggs moved forward with practiced efficiency, rolling the smuggler onto his stomach, securing his hands behind his back with plastic flex cuffs, patting him down for additional weapons. Across the room, Reynolds was doing the same with the unconscious man who was just beginning to stir. Ashford had finally gained control of his opponent, using his body weight to pin the man while another Marine secured him. 3 intruders, all disarmed, all secured. 0 friendly casualties. Ilara holstered her weapon and only then allowed herself to look at Thorne. He was still on the floor, one hand pressed to his throat where the knife had cut him. It was a shallow wound, barely breaking the skin, but the blood was bright red against his pale flesh. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing rapid and shallow, not from exertion but from shock. He had come within millimeters of death, and the person who had saved him was the woman he had spent 2 weeks trying to destroy. Ilara walked over, knelt beside him, examined the cut with professional detachment. Superficial laceration, minimal bleeding. You'll want to clean it and apply antiseptic when we get back, but it's not serious. Thorne stared at her, his mouth working but no words coming out. "Can you stand, Gunny?" she asked. He nodded mutely and let her help him to his feet. Then he pulled away, stumbling to the far corner of the hut, and sat with his back against the wall, staring at his hands. His blood was on them, his own blood, the physical evidence of how close he had come. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind died down, the snow stopped, and an eerie silence descended over the mountains. The rising sun cast long shadows across a world transformed into pristine white, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. Inside the hut, the team had maintained watch through the night, rotating shifts, keeping the prisoners secured and separated. Garrett had regained consciousness around midnight, weak but coherent. His core temperature had stabilized. He would live, and he would keep all his fingers and toes. It was a small miracle. With the weather cleared, Ashford was finally able to get a signal on the emergency satellite beacon that had survived the electromagnetic pulse. He sent their coordinates and a brief situation report. Equipment failure. Enemy contact. 3 hostile personnel secured. No friendly KIA. A rescue helicopter was dispatched immediately. The MH-60 appeared an hour later, following the coordinates, its rotors beating the air into submission. The team loaded the prisoners first, then Garrett on a stretcher, then the rest of the personnel. Thorne was the last to board, moving slowly, his hand still pressed to the bandage on his throat. Master Chief Kane was standing on the tarmac when they landed at the facility. His face was unreadable as he watched them disembark, exhausted, mud-stained, but alive. All of them. Every single one. Ashford approached first, came to attention. Master Chief, Lieutenant Ashford reporting. Mission compromised by environmental conditions. Total electronic failure following lightning strike. 3 hostile personnel encountered and secured. 0 friendly casualties. I read your initial report, Lieutenant. Expand on the enemy contact. Sir, we took shelter in a stone structure to wait out the storm. 3 armed individuals entered. Appeared to be domestic militia or survivalist types. Possibly weapon smugglers using the storm as cover for movement. Close quarters engagement ensued. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne engaged the first hostile. I engaged the second. Captain Voss neutralized the third and prevented further casualties. All 3 hostiles were secured and are currently in custody of military police. Kane's eyes moved to Alara. Captain Voss, you neutralized a hostile? Yes, Master Chief. Used a vascular neck restraint to render one unconscious. Used non-lethal force to control another who had a knife to Gunnery Sergeant Thorne's throat. You had authorization for lethal force. Yes, Master Chief. But you chose not to use it. I assessed that minimum necessary force was sufficient to control the threat. Lethal force was available, but not required. Kane was silent for a long moment, his ice-chip eyes boring into her. Then he nodded once, sharp and definitive. After action review 0800 tomorrow. Full command staff. You're all confined to base until then. Dismissed. The team dispersed, heading toward the barracks, toward hot showers and warm food and sleep. Ilara walked alone, her body screaming with exhaustion, her mind still running through everything that had happened, analyzing, categorizing, storing lessons learned. She reached her quarters, sat on the edge of her bunk, and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had just survived. Her hands were shaking again, the post-adrenaline crash hitting hard. She stared at them, willing them to be still, breathing deeply, counting to 10. Her phone buzzed. Text message from her sister. How's training going? You okay? Ilara's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed, almost died twice today. Saved a man who's been trying to destroy me for 2 weeks. I'm exhausted, and I don't know if I can keep doing this. She stared at the message for 10 seconds, then deleted it. Typed instead, tough day. I'm good. Love you too. She pulled her father's dog tags from under her shirt, held them in her palm. Captain Daniel Voss, U.S. Army Rangers. The metal was warm from her body heat, worn smooth by decades of contact. Dad, she whispered to the empty room. I don't know if this is what you wanted from me. I don't know if any of this matters. I'm so tired of fighting to be allowed to fight. Was it worth it? Everything you sacrificed, was it worth it? Silence answered her, the same silence that had answered that question for 28 years. She lay back on the bunk, closed her eyes, and was asleep in seconds, still wearing her boots, her father's tags clutched in her hand. The after-action review was held in the main briefing room at 0800 the next morning. The room was packed. All the instructors, the command staff, the candidates who had completed the exercise. Colonel Patterson, the base commander, sat at the head of the table. Master Chief Kane sat to his right, his expression unreadable, as always. Lieutenant Ashford presented first. His report was clear, factual, professional. He detailed the timeline from insertion to extraction, the equipment failures, the navigation challenges, the enemy contact. He credited Alara's land navigation skills with saving the team from the storm, and her tactical decision-making with preventing casualties in the HUD engagement. When he finished, Colonel Patterson turned to Thorne. "Gunnery Sergeant, your perspective on these events?" Thorne stood, his back rigid, his face carefully neutral. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he began speaking in a voice that was rough but steady. "Sir, I failed." The room went silent. I failed to adapt to environmental conditions. I advocated for a tactically unsound course of action during the storm that would have led my team into a kill zone. I created command confusion by contradicting Lieutenant Ashford's orders. In the HUD engagement, I led emotion override training. I charged without assessing the threat, without coordinating with my team, without maintaining fire discipline. I endangered everyone. He paused, his jaw working. Captain Voss saved my life. Not once, twice. During the march, when I wanted to leave Private Garrett, she refused. She carried him, made all of us carry him, reminded us that we don't abandon our people. That decision saved unit cohesion and possibly saved Garrett's life. "And in the hut?" Patterson prompted. "In the hut, I was pinned, a knife to my throat. I was screaming for Captain Voss to shoot the man holding it. She didn't. She controlled the situation without lethal force. She demonstrated more discipline in that moment than I've shown in my entire career." Thorne looked directly at Alara for the first time. "Sir, I need to say something on the record. I questioned Captain Voss's qualifications from the moment she arrived. I harassed her. I created a hostile environment. I used my position to make her life harder. And I did it because—" his voice cracked slightly. "I did it because I was afraid." "Afraid of what, Gunnery Sergeant?" "My daughter, Vanessa. She's 19. She enlisted in the Army against my wishes. She wants to try for Ranger School. And I'm terrified that she'll die the way my wife did, not in combat, but from the stress of this life, from the grinding fear and the deployments and the uncertainty. I saw Captain Voss, and I saw my daughter, and I wanted to prove that women couldn't handle it, so Vanessa would give up the dream." He took a deep breath. "But that's not protection. That's ego and fear disguised as concern. The truth is, Captain Voss is a better operator than I am. Not stronger, not tougher, more disciplined. She makes decisions based on training and tactics, not emotion. In combat, discipline beats aggression. She proved that. And I owe her an apology that words can't possibly carry." He came to attention, looked at Alara. "Captain, I'm sorry. For everything." Patterson let the words hang in the air for a long moment. Then he turned to Kane. "Master Chief, your recommendation?" Kane stood slowly. "Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, you are hereby removed from this course effective immediately. You will be reassigned to instructor duty at Camp Pendleton. Your record will reflect performance deficiencies during field exercise. You are dismissed." Thorne's face showed no surprise. He had known this was coming. "Yes, Master Chief. Garrett, Thorne stopped at the door. Your admission today took more courage than most men show in combat. You recognized your failure and owned it completely. That's the first step toward redemption. Don't waste it. And when your daughter calls you asking about Ranger School, you tell her the truth. It's hard. It's dangerous. And if she's half the soldier Captain Voss is, she'll make it. Thorne's eyes glistened. Yes, Master Chief. He walked out, his back straight despite the weight of his disgrace. Kane turned to Alara. Captain Voss, your performance in this exercise exceeded every standard. Your navigation under conditions of zero visibility saved 12 lives. Your medical intervention saved Private Garrett. Your tactical restraint in the hut prevented casualties and upheld the rules of engagement under extreme stress. You demonstrated leadership from the bottom, guiding officers and senior enlisted personnel without overstepping your rank. That is rare. That is exceptional. Well done. Thank you, Master Chief. I'm not finished. Report to my office at 1000 hours. We need to talk. Kane's office was Spartan. A desk, 2 chairs, a file cabinet, and a single window that looked out at the desert. On the wall behind his desk hung a photograph of a much younger Kane standing next to her father. Both men were young, barely older than she was now, their faces unlined, their eyes not yet carrying the weight of everything they would see. Kane saw her looking at the photograph. Mogadishu, 1993. 3 days before the mission. We were arguing about intelligence reliability, as I recall. Your father thought the assessment was thin. He was right. He gestured to the chair. Sit, please. Alara sat, her posture still military straight despite the invitation to relax. Kane poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there for hours, handed her one. I'm going to tell you something I should have told you when you arrived. I requested you specifically for this course. I pulled strings, made it happen, and I designed this entire exercise around you. I know, Master Chief, you told me. I told you I was testing you. What I didn't tell you was why. In 6 months, I retire. 34 years of service. Persian Gulf, Desert Storm, Mogadishu, Iraq, Afghanistan. I've trained thousands of warriors. Most of them I'll forget. Some I'll remember forever. Your father is one I'll remember. He picked up a folder from his desk. This course has been running for 40 years. In 40 years, no woman has completed it. Not because they weren't capable, because we didn't let them try. Or when we did, we sabotaged them. Bad gear, changed coordinates, hostile instructors, impossible standards. The system protected itself. I knew about the sabotage, Master Chief. I adapted. Yes, you did. But you need to understand what you accomplished. This morning, I'm recommending to Colonel Patterson that this pipeline be officially opened to female candidates. Not as a trial, not as an experiment, as standard policy. Because you proved beyond any reasonable doubt that a woman can not only complete it, but excel at it. Alara felt something tighten in her chest. Sir, I don't want to be a symbol. You don't get that choice, Captain. Your father didn't want to be a symbol when he died in Mogadishu. He just wanted to save his men. But his sacrifice became something larger. It meant something to the Rangers who survived because of him. Your success here means something to every woman who will come after you. That's the burden of being first. But here's what I've learned in 34 years. You don't carry that burden alone. He pulled out another envelope, handed it to her. Your next assignment, Joint Task Force, classified location. You'll be training partner forces in counterterrorism operations. It's a combat deployment. Real bullets this time. Alara opened the envelope, scanned the orders. When do I leave? 2 weeks. But before you go, I need you to understand something. I knew your father for 3 days before that mission. We both arrived in Mogadishu on the same transport, SEAL Liaison Element and Ranger Command. We shared quarters, planned operations together, drank terrible coffee at 0300. 72 hours. In that time, he taught me more about leadership than officers I served under for years. Kane's voice roughened slightly. He told me, fear is just data. It tells you the stakes are real. Then you put it aside and do the job. You said almost the exact same thing to Lieutenant Ashford during the exercise. Those are his words, coming through you. That's his legacy, living in you. Ilara's throat was too tight to speak. You honored his memory, Captain. Not just by completing this course, by demonstrating what he believed, that competence has no gender, that discipline beats aggression, that the mission includes bringing everyone home. He would be proud, and I'm proud. Dismissed. Ilara stood, came to attention, rendered the sharpest salute of her life. Kane returned it, equally sharp. She turned and walked to the door. Captain? She stopped, turned back. Thank you, Kane said simply, for proving an old man right before he retires, for giving me hope that the future can fight as hard as the past, and for reminding me why I've done this for 34 years. Master Chief, you gave me the chance. I just took it. No, Kane said, his ice chip eyes suddenly warm. You earned it. There's a difference. 6 months later, Ilara stood in a dusty compound on the other side of the world, training a group of Allied forces in advanced marksmanship. The sun was brutal, the heat oppressive, but she was in her element. One of the trainees, a young man who spoke heavily accented English, approached her during a break. Captain Sergeant, he said, the rank confusion making her smile. You are woman. How do you lead men in combat? Ilara looked at him while she cleaned her rifle, her hands moving through the familiar motions. I don't lead men. I lead soldiers. Gender doesn't pull triggers. Training does. Discipline does. But your military allows this? This is accepted? My military is learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. 6 months ago, I was the first woman to complete a specific training course. Not because I was the first capable, because I was the first they let try. Change is hard, but it's necessary. That evening, alone in her containerized housing unit, she received a video call. Master Chief Kane appeared on screen, wearing a polo shirt and jeans, sitting in what looked like a classroom. Master Chief, retired life treating you well? Boring as hell, Captain. So I'm teaching at the community college now. Criminal justice. Figured I'd torture a new generation. Ilara laughed. They don't know what they're in for. How's the deployment? Good. Challenging. Had an interesting conversation today about women in combat roles. How'd you handle it? Told him gender doesn't pull triggers. Training does. Kane smiled. Good answer. He paused. Ilara, I got a call from Colonel Patterson. They're naming the new female integration program after your father. The Daniel Voss Legacy Initiative. They want you to speak at the launch ceremony next month. Will you do it? Ilara was silent for a long moment. I don't know what to say. Say yes. It's not about you. It's about every woman who comes after. That's the legacy. Your father started it when he refused to leave his men. You continued it when you refused to quit despite everything they threw at you. Now you pass it on. I'll do it, Master Chief. Good. I'll be there too. Wouldn't miss it. The night before the ceremony, Ilara returned to the facility for the first time since graduation. The place looked the same. Brutal concrete and razor wire, the Nevada desert stretching to mountains that stood indifferent and eternal. She drove to the pistol range just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossibly beautiful. She stood in her lane, loaded her SIG M17, and began running the same drills she had run that first week. Draw, fire twice, reload, fire twice. The rhythm was meditation, muscle memory, connection to fundamentals that never changed. The brass casings tinkled on concrete. The smell of cordite hung in the cooling air. "Thought I'd find you here." She turned. Lieutenant Commander Ashford, he had been promoted, stood a few feet behind her, smiling. He looked different, more confident. The uncertainty that had marked him during the exercise was gone, replaced by quiet competence. "Sir, congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you. And please, we're off duty. It's Brennan." He moved to stand beside her, looking out at the mountains. "I'm teaching the first officially integrated selection course tomorrow. 20 candidates. 8 are women. How do you feel about that? Terrified? Hopeful? Excited? You taught me something important out there. That fear is just information. It tells you the stakes matter. So I'm listening to what it's saying. These women are trusting us to give them a fair shot. Then give them what Kane gave me, the hardest test possible, and the respect to prove they can pass it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the ridgeline. "Thorne called me last week," Ashford said. "He asked permission to attend the ceremony tomorrow. Wants to apologize to you publicly." Alara considered this. "What did you tell him?" "I said it was your decision." "Tell him yes. Redemption matters." The next morning, the ceremony was held in the main auditorium. 200 people filled the seats. Instructors, command staff, the new class of candidates, including the 8 women who would be the first to officially attempt integration. Master Chief Kane sat in the front row wearing his dress uniform, his chest covered in ribbons that told the story of 3 decades of warfare. Colonel Patterson gave the opening remarks, explaining the history of the facility, the importance of the new initiative, the legacy of Captain Daniel Voss, who had exemplified the warrior ethos of never leaving anyone behind. Then it was Alara's turn. She walked to the podium, looked out at the faces watching her, and she began to speak. "My father died when I was 5 years old. Mogadishu, Somalia, 1993. He took 4 rounds covering the withdrawal of 3 wounded Rangers. It took him 7 minutes to bleed out. His last words were, 'Tell my daughter I did my job.'" Her voice was steady, calm. I didn't understand what that meant for a long time. I thought it meant he completed his mission. But as I grew older, as I followed him into military service, I realized he was saying something deeper. His job wasn't just the mission. His job was living up to the standard that says we don't leave our people. The standard that says competence matters more than demographics. The standard that says discipline beats aggression. She paused. 6 months ago, I completed the course that you will begin tomorrow. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not because of the physical challenges, not because of the environmental stress, but because I was fighting 2 battles simultaneously. The official test of my capabilities and the unofficial test of whether women deserve to be here at all. I'm not going to tell you it was fair. It wasn't. My gear was wrong. My coordinates were sabotaged. I was harassed, questioned, and tested in ways my male peers were not. But here's what I learned. Fairness is not something you're given. It's something you earn through undeniable competence. She looked directly at the 8 women in the audience. You will face what I faced, maybe worse. You will be held to a higher standard. Your mistakes will be magnified. Your successes will be minimized. And you will be tempted to quit, to decide that the fight isn't worth it. Don't quit, not because you owe it to me or to my father or to the women who come after you. Quit if you want to quit, but don't quit because someone made it harder than it should be, because that's exactly what they want. And giving them what they want is the only true failure. My father taught me something when I was 10 years old. He said, fear is just data. It tells you the stakes are real. Then you put it aside and do the job. Tomorrow, you'll begin learning what that means. Some of you will complete this course, some won't. But everyone who tries with integrity and commitment will leave here better than they arrived. That's the real legacy, not the completion rate, not the statistics, but the understanding that we judge each other by what we do when the world is watching and when it isn't. By the choices we make when the easy path and the right path diverge. By our capacity to hold ourselves together when everything else is falling apart. She stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly, then built, then became a standing ovation that lasted for 2 full minutes. Master Chief Kane was the first on his feet, his face showing an emotion she had never seen from him before. Pride. After the ceremony, as people filed out, a figure approached her. Garrett Thorne, wearing his dress uniform, his face carefully neutral. Captain Voss, may I have a moment? Of course, Gunnery Sergeant. I wanted to apologize, publicly, in front of witnesses, for everything I did to you during the course. It was unprofessional, it was wrong, and it came from a place of fear, not strength. You saved my life, and you did it with more grace than I deserved. I'm sorry. Ilara extended her hand. Apology accepted, Gunny. How's your daughter? Thorne's face softened. She's in Ranger School, week 4. Doing well, apparently. I called her this morning, told her about you, about what you said in your speech. She wants to meet you someday, if you'd be willing. I'd be honored. He shook her hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. Then he stepped back, saluted with parade ground precision, and walked away. Master Chief Kane appeared at her elbow. That was a hell of a speech, Captain. Thank you, Master Chief. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why it worked. He handed her the photograph from his office, him and her father in Mogadishu. I want you to have this. Your father gave me something when he died. The understanding that the mission is bigger than any one of us. You've carried that forward. Now it's yours to pass on. Ilara took the photograph, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. Master Chief, I don't know how to thank you. Then don't. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep proving that competence has no gender. Keep showing young warriors what discipline looks like. And when you're my age, find someone to pass it to. That's how legacies survive. That evening, Ilara returned to the pistol range one last time. The sun was setting again, the sky on fire with color. She stood in her lane, her rifle slung across her chest, her father's dog tags warm against her skin. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of training, the doubters and the believers, the harassment and the respect, the fear and the discipline. All of it had led to this moment, standing in the place where she had proven herself, looking toward a future where other women would not have to fight as hard because she had fought first. She pulled out the photograph Kane had given her. Her father, young and alive, standing next to a young Kane, both of them not yet marked by everything they would endure. She touched her father's face through the glass.
"I did my job, Dad," she whispered. "Just like you."
The desert wind carried her words away into the vast emptiness. And in that emptiness, she felt a peace she had never known before. Not the peace of completion, but the peace of purpose fulfilled. Not the end of the journey, but the beginning of the next chapter. She turned from the range and walked toward her truck, the sunset at her back, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. Tomorrow she would deploy again. Tomorrow she would train more soldiers, face more challenges, continue building the legacy that her father had started, and Master Chief Kane had helped her carry forward. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply be a soldier, a daughter, a link in an unbroken chain of warriors who had chosen discipline over ego, duty over comfort, the mission over self. Her father's philosophy had become her truth. Kane's test had become her validation. And tomorrow's challenges would become her proving ground. The discipline code wasn't written in manuals or taught in classrooms. It was forged in moments when everything fell apart and you chose to hold yourself together anyway. She was ready.